For 9 seasons, these two played best friends who told each other everything. Off camera, one of them just admitted he spent years silently annoyed at the other, and didn't say a word about it until over a decade later. This one told an entire room of journalists he was miserable during some of the show's biggest years, while the world thought he was living the dream. The cast of How I Met Your Mother spent 9 years playing 5 people who loved each other unconditionally. What actually happened behind the cameras is messier, more honest, and far more interesting than the fiction. Here's what the cast has actually said, in their own words, years later, when there was finally nothing left to protect. Number 1. Neil Patrick Harris admits he thought Josh Radnor couldn't stand him. This is the story that kicked off the entire conversation, and it came from Harris himself more than a decade after the show ended. Appearing as a guest on Radnor's own podcast, How We Made Your Mother, Harris said something that visibly caught his former co-star off guard. He told Radnor directly that he had always sensed his performance annoyed him on set. Radnor's response was immediate. He asked Harris to say more. Harris explained where the feeling came from. Barney Stinson was written as a joke machine, built for physical comedy and constant bits, while Ted Mosby carried most of the show's emotional weight. Harris said he was so locked into chasing the comedy in every scene that he rarely thought about the heart of it, because that wasn't his job. He said he could sense Radnor's frustration building in scenes that were supposed to land emotionally, while Harris was, in his own words, over there doing spit takes. Radnor didn't deny that tension existed. He offered his own theory instead, suggesting it may have come from confusion between the actor and the character, since Barney was often written to be dismissive toward Ted, and Harris played that dismissiveness so convincingly, it occasionally bled into how filming actually felt. Neither man framed it as a grudge, but it's a rare, honest admission of real creative friction between two leads who spent 9 years playing best friends, and neither one brought it up publicly until years after the cameras stopped rolling. Number 2. Josh Radnor got tired of being blamed for a character he didn't write. This one isn't tension between castmates directly, it's tension between an actor and the role that defined his entire career, and it clearly wore on him. Ted Mosby became one of the most heavily criticized protagonists in modern sitcom history. Fans accused the character of being self-absorbed, entitled, and exhausting to watch chase women for 9 seasons. Radnor eventually addressed it head-on, years later, on his own podcast. He pointed out something fans often forget. He didn't write Ted's choices. He didn't control the plot. He was, in his words, contractually obligated to play the scenes exactly as scripted, whether or not he personally agreed with what the character was doing. That distinction mattered to him enough that he kept bringing it up in interviews long after the show ended. It's a specific kind of frustration, not with a co-star, but with an audience that spent years conflating the actor with a character he had almost no creative control over. Number 3. Jason Segel was quietly miserable while the world thought he had it all. This is arguably the most surprising admission on this entire list because nothing about it was visible on screen at the time. Segel has said in multiple interviews years after the show ended that during some of the most successful years of his career, while HIMYM was a hit and his film career was taking off simultaneously, he was privately unhappy. He's described feeling like something was fundamentally off, even while everyone around him kept telling him how well things were going. He's talked about the physical toll of it too, spending years shooting the show while also writing and filming movies during every hiatus, describing the pace as eventually becoming something he simply stopped enjoying. This wasn't about disliking his castmates, but it does mean that for a stretch of the show's run, one of its 5 central actors was going through something the audience and possibly even some of his co-stars had no idea about. That kind of private strain has a way of changing how a person shows up on set, even if nobody around them can point to exactly what changed. Number 4. The cast quietly split down the middle over the finale, and never fully agreed again. The ending of How I Met Your Mother remains one of the most argued about finales in television history. What's less talked about is that the disagreement didn't stay outside the cast. It exists inside it too. Neil Patrick Harris has publicly defended the ending multiple times, going as far as calling himself a fan of how the show wrapped up years after it aired. Jason Segel has said on the record that he never actually got around to watching the finale at all. Kobe Smulders has defended the choice to end the show with Ted and Robin together. pointing out that the entire series was built around that relationship from the very first episode. That's not a small gap. One lead actively defends the ending, another never even watched it. A third defends a different piece of it entirely. 9 years of playing a tight-knit friend group, and by the end, the actual cast couldn't agree on how their own story should have finished. Number 5, Christine Milioti found out her character's fate from a colleague who'd had a few drinks. This one is less about tension and more about how badly the show's biggest secret was handled internally, and how it left one of the cast feeling blindsided. Milioti has said she learned that her character, the mother, was going to die by the end of the series at a holiday party from co-creator Craig Thomas after he'd had a couple of drinks and gotten talkative. She'd asked the question half as a joke, expecting a laugh, not an actual answer. Instead, she got the real ending. On the spot, at a party. She's described sitting there sobbing once it sank in. Thomas reportedly sent her an apologetic email the next day, saying he was sorry for telling her that way once he realized how upset she'd become. It's not a feud, but it's a genuinely uncomfortable moment where one of the show's stars found out the emotional core of her own character's arc by accident in a room full of people from someone who probably wasn't supposed to tell her that way at all. Number 6. The episode that turned the cast's own castmates against the writer's room. This one involves the cast directly, and it caused real damage to the show's reputation at the time. In a Season 8 episode, Allison Hannigan, Kobe Smulders, and Josh Radnor appeared in a segment dressed and styled to resemble Asian martial arts masters. The backlash was immediate and loud, with the criticism trending under its own hashtag within hours of the episode airing. Co-creator Carter Bays issued a public apology afterward, on behalf of himself and Craig Thomas, acknowledging the segment as a mistake. The 3 cast members involved didn't choose that material. They were reading scripts handed to them. But being the visible face of a decision that drew that much public criticism, without having written a word of it themselves, is its own kind of quiet strain, the kind that tends to sit with performers long after the news cycle moves on. Number 7. Neil Patrick Harris and Josh Radnor revisited. The gap between 2 very different actors. This deserves a second look, because the more Harris has talked about it, the more specific the picture gets. Harris has described feeling like a gnat buzzing around the set, in his own words, constantly chasing a joke or a bit while Radnor was trying to hold together the emotional through line of a scene. He said he could sense that dynamic causing real frustration in the moment, even while both of them kept performing through it. What makes this notable is how long it took either of them to say it out loud. 9 seasons of playing best friends, years of press tours where both men spoke warmly about their chemistry. And it wasn't until a podcast interview, more than a decade after the show ended, that either of them admitted there had been real, ongoing friction underneath all of it. That's not hatred, but it is proof that 2 people can spend 9 years convincingly performing closeness on screen while quietly working through something very different behind it. Number 8. So did any of this cast actually hate each other? Here's where this story takes an honest turn, because it would be misleading to leave it here. Every documented moment on this list is real. The tension between Harris and Radnor, Segel's private unhappiness, the finale disagreement, the uncomfortable way Milioti learned her character's fate, the backlash over the Season 8 episode. But none of it amounts to actual hostility between these 5 people. If anything, the more recent evidence points the opposite direction. Jason Segel and Kobe Smulders reunited on screen years later on the Apple TV Plus series Shrinking, in a storyline Segel personally requested her for. He's described their time on HIMYM as formative years they spent together. The kind of language people use about family, not about someone they resent. Neil Patrick Harris's own husband, David Burtka, was cast in a recurring role on the show during its original run. Kobe Smulders' real husband appeared in it too. So did Allison Hannigan's. The show's creators were close enough with the cast that they wove their actual spouses into the fictional universe. Season after season. That's not the pattern you see in a cast that secretly resents each other. That's the pattern of a group of people who spent 9 years building something close enough to let it spill into their real lives. So here's the honest answer. The tension on this list is real: creative friction, personal struggles, disagreements about how the story should have ended. Those things happened, and the cast has been open about all of it in the years since. But can't stand each other? That part doesn't hold up. What actually happened behind the scenes of How I Met Your Mother looks a lot less like a feud, and a lot more like what happens on almost every long-running show. 5 people spending 9 years together, hitting real friction along the way, and somehow staying close enough afterward to keep showing up for each other more than a decade later. Sometimes the real story is more interesting than the rumor. So which one of these surprised you the most? Tell us in the comments.